Hello, everyone, and welcome to a tribute and to a celebration of Quincy Abbot, who is a wonderful, wonderful man who has touched so many lives. And today we're going to hear really just a fraction of those. And we all, as we move through life, are kind of like, pebbles falling in a puddle. We create little ripples as we interact with other people. Well, Quincy is one of those people that creates tsunamis, and his impact from Connecticut to the region, to the national level, has just been incredible. And we're going to have an opportunity to hear from some of the people that were impacted directly, and hopefully hear some stories about how many people beyond them were impacted in ways that maybe Quincy doesn't even know. So we're going to start today by watching a little video that we've prepared, Quincy in his own words, talking about the founding of CIL. I am Kent Schwendy, the current CEO of CIL, and you'll hear later from some of the people who were around back when Quincy started CIL, but we were founded by Quincy's efforts, not by him alone, but like many things, he was involved. And you'll hear more about that story as we go through the day. Most of the presentation will actually be by various people talking about their interactions and their experiences with Quincy. But we'll start with a short video. It's just a few minutes. So please pull up a chair, make yourself comfortable, and enjoy this video.
Let me start with the reason why you wouldn't expect me to be an advocate. I was a math major in college. I studied to become an actuary, and I'm a fellow of the Society of Actuaries, and I headed up the tax department at Connecticut General and then Cigna for many years, none of which has to do with dealing with people in reality. But then I had a daughter. The third one. About 5:30 in the morning, I got a call from the doctor that said, "The baby isn't coming out. I want to do a cesarean." Becky was born at 7:21. All of a sudden, I felt a relief. I knew that everything was okay. There was something special about her from the very beginning. She was a perfect baby for 3 months. Never cried or gave us a hard time. And by the time she was 2, she became difficult to manage. One day in church, when she was about a year old, a friend came down and said, "Here, Quincy, you want to read this book? You and Your Retarded Child." Never had I thought of that. And that's what got me interested in the field of people with disabilities. I joined the Hartford Association for Retarded Children at that time. One of my friends at Connecticut General then came to me and said, "Quincy, it's about time for you to get involved. Will you go on the board of directors next year?" And I said, "Yes." After the second meeting, I went up to Randy and I said, "Randy, there's nobody else on this board that's capable of being the president next year. He laughed. So after 1 year on the board, I became the president of ARC. Then I went on to president of the national board. And it was the Office of Protection and Advocacy 10th anniversary. And they were the first one to give me an award, a little silver platter, which I treasure greatly. The story of CIL starts with the fact that at one time there was no such things as adults with mental retardation, what we called it then, intellectual disabilities now, live in the community. And they generally went into one of the big institutions, Mansfield Training School or Southbury Training School. I walked into a big room in one of the major buildings, and there were maybe 25 people sitting around on the floor doing nothing other than looking at, I think there were 2 TV sets up 15 feet in the air. There was one open door which went into the bathroom. There was no such thing as privacy. They said, Becky's never going here. And that led to the lawsuit against Mansfield. And when the settlement was arrived at, the commissioner of mental retardation at that time had the open press conference, and I was invited to. And he got up there and he started saying, well, of course, even though you got this settlement, those people who are seriously retarded will never be able to live in the community. And I stood up and I said, Commissioner, I would like to take you to visit people right over the border in New York State and right over the border in Massachusetts State who are doing that. It made a considerable splash in the paper the next day. It took 3 years to design a system. Part of the system was to move people into the community in group homes that had 6 or fewer residents. Tom Nerney, who was the executive director then, came to me and said, Quincy, here are 2 documents I've written up. One of them is for the Corporation for Supported Employment to help people in the community find jobs. The second is the Corporation for Independent Living to help in getting living quarters together for them. That's how CIL got formed. There's no question that the quality of life is better in the community than in an institution. My father was a school teacher. He believed that every student had abilities, and his philosophy was to help the student find, develop, and use those abilities. Each of us has some abilities. Even the most severely disabled person has some abilities. And what they want, that we want for them, is that they can exercise their abilities to the greatest amount that they can. And that's part of the secret, I think, in moving to more individualized support, is helping them to figure out their abilities and to realize them. As I look over my lifetime of volunteer activities, I really sense my father's DNA. I try to find people's abilities and help them to use those abilities.
So there's a little snapshot into how CIL was formed, but we're only one of the many, many things that were impacted or frankly created by Quincy's involvement. So let's take a little journey through his life through the eyes of 8 different people who interacted with him in different ways. We'll have them tell us a little more about his life leading up to an opportunity to hear from Quincy himself. So Quincy, if you wouldn't mind turning your video on now, I'd like you to be able to see and talk, listen as the people are talking about you. Welcome, Quincy. Thank you. And the first person we're going to hear from is Barry Bosworth. And Barry is a past president of the Arc of Connecticut, as well as a past board member and president of the board here at CIL. He's served with Quincy as the co-chair of the CT-ARC Mansfield Litigation Committee. And so he's going to talk a little bit, I think, about what Quincy did at the beginning and here in Connecticut. So Barry, if you want to join in. And Barry, you'll need to unmute too.
Okay, can you hear me? Good. Well, I got introduced to Quincy about 40 years ago. It was suggested to me by my bosses at a large public accounting firm. It was also the independent accounting firm for Connecticut General, that I get involved in a local non-for-profit. That would be a good thing to do. I said, okay, what do you suggest? And they said, I got a guy. I know just the guy that you need to meet. So they set up a meeting. One of the partners and I went to meet Quincy Abbot at Connecticut General. And like Quincy said in that video, he was director of taxes at that time. He eventually became a senior vice president at Cigna. But we didn't talk about taxes when I went to meet him. He talked about his 4 daughters, and he had a 8x10 photograph of each one of them on his credenza, and they were all beautiful young ladies. One of them was Becky, who, as you know, Becky happened to have an intellectual disability. Well, anyway, as they say in the movies, that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Quincy got me involved, first with the local ARC, and then with ARC of Connecticut. And, you know, Quincy spoke like a good guy who wanted to do things that were to do good things and see good things get done. I was very, very impressed, and still, and I have remained impressed for a long, long time to this day. Quincy helped me get educated and to grow in my thinking, as a good mentor does. He showed me what a leader does, and for the most part, he showed me by example. One of the times that sticks out in my head from the years of working with Quincy, and he talked about it a little bit in that video that we just saw. And every time I think of it, which I do quite often, I relive it all the time. We'd settled the Mansfield litigation. We had a consent decree. There was a press conference, as Quincy mentioned, and it was at the Capitol. And there was loads of reporters there, and the room was packed. And we had a verbal agreement that the commissioner would be brief and supportive of the consent decree. We'd already signed it. The state signed off on it. Quincy and I and several others were proud to have signed the agreement. And then the commissioner kind of went off script and started talking about ridiculous things about what would happen to these poor people who were going to be, quote, dumped, into his words, into the community. I got really nervous because I was nervous that maybe some of the press would pick up on these ridiculous comments because they were being made by a commissioner. And our litigation attorney happened to be standing next to me. And I just said, oh, Quincy can't let that stand. And he just said, don't worry, he won't. Well, of course, I should have known that. I did know that somewhere in my gut, but I had no cause for concern because Quincy, in his eloquent and Quincy-esque convincing way, made it crystal clear to everybody in the room how lives were going to be better and how the implementation of the decree was going to be done in a careful and a concerned way. And that essentially all the reporters in the room picked up on that, and they wrote quite appropriate and very favorable stories in their papers. And they ignored the commissioner's really what were his ridiculous comments. So Quincy, I just want to say to you, although I'm sure you know over the years how much I respect you, it's because of, bear with me, it's because of your intellect and your caring and your hard work that many, many people's lives are better today. And 40 years later, my daughter, Kat, thanks you too. She's now living in a small group home about 15 minutes from us, and a home that exists in no small part because of you. I thank you too.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much. So next we're going to hear from Diane Aubin, who's the president of the ARC of Connecticut Board of Directors and also the vice president of the ARC of Eastern Connecticut. Diane, if you could turn your camera on and unmute yourself. And if she is not able to, we will we'll move on and we'll try to come back to Diane later. So next up is let's see, Leo Sarkeesian, who's the executive director of the ARC of Massachusetts, and he served on several committees for the ARC at the time that that Quincy was also serving as an officer of the organization. And prior to joining the statewide association, he oversaw local multi-service chapter of the ARC. So he's interacted with Quincy over the years as well. And Leo, welcome. And
pleasure. Hey, thank you, Kent. I want to thank you and CIL for this great opportunity. Think the world of Quincy, and I say it with a Z sometimes. So, but I think I met him before I was at the ARC of Massachusetts during the years, and we'd have the conventions. But I'm going to focus really. I can't help but focus on some national things about Quincy too. But I want to just say one thing at the outset. Quincy, you were an anchor presence at the ARC at a time when one was sorely needed. And that anchoring really was in two ways, not only for the national organization, but bridging across states, okay? And I can't forget that because I remember first with New England, you introducing me to Peg Dignotti, and Peg, Jim Healy, who was in Rhode Island, and I started to talk together about practices. And before you knew it, because again, of the bridging you did, we suddenly had some mid-Atlantic bonds. Now, the ARC was great at that in general, but I think the bonds that developed, the fact that we met together, New Jersey, Maryland, New York, along with New England, and I'm looking down for a second because I skipped Pennsylvania. Bill West flew up once for a meeting before he retired. So this was very powerful stuff. In addition to the national meetings we were able to have these regional meetings, not only to talk about the community imperative, but to talk about how we could build state organizations and the challenges we faced from a funding perspective, from a capacity building perspective, and also how to reach more communities, how to reach families, how to connect with them. And one thing, again, you would cross the line, you would reach out and say, hey, have you thought about this, Leo? You would ask people. I was serving on 2 different committees of the ARC at one time. So different executive directors were encouraged to do this. And sometimes, yes, there's the outreach through, nomination forms and things like that. And then there's the personal outreach that happens that you did. And then even though Peter and Trudy are going to talk about some of the national things, and Marty, of course, your diplomacy was unbelievable, during a time where there was bridging to be done in other ways. And of course, the change in the ARC's location, and I won't say much about that because I don't want to take out a lot of thunder from others, and your recruitment along with others of Steve Eidelman for a transition period that we sorely needed, was very important. He was a positive transitional figure as the executive director at the ARC. And finally, I remember you being passionate about the community imperative, and you even co-sponsored, I think, a conference in California and elsewhere on the community imperative after your term as president, and kept the fight up. So Quincy, you solved problems, you built bridges, you nurtured a new future that we're very proud about at the ARC today. And I don't know if it would have happened without you. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Leo. We appreciate those comments. And next up, we're going to hear from Trudy Jacobson, who's with the National ARC. She's a senior advisor in development of partnerships. She's also a parent advocate. And Trudy also is one of the people who, behind the scenes, really helped to pull this event together and help us to get all the speakers tracked down and lined up. So a special thanks to Trudy for making today possible, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. I guess maybe one trait I share with Quincy is the fun of working a little bit behind the scenes. So I met Quincy when I asked to take him to breakfast in Hartford in 2009. And probably of everybody on this panel, I may know him the least amount of time. But after a bit of due diligence, researching, and the support that Quincy had given to the ARC over the years, I realized that I wanted to meet him. I mentioned this to Peter and Marty and Leo, all who obviously are on this panel, and they filled me in on why I needed to meet him, to learn the heart of what we do, what's the core strength of the ARC nationally, and how Quincy in many ways embodies all of this. Since then, we've met for breakfast or lunch every year since. Unfortunately, this year our streak may end due to the pandemic. So Quincy, this year, I just get to share my affection and respect on this panel. And I know I join a chorus of many sending virtual hugs. One of the first things that I worked on nationally was starting our rebranding. And I mentioned this to Quincy, who knows that little is new over the years and how much we've tried in the area of fundraising and marketing. But he has the nicest way of sharing his point of view. And he often makes very pointed and relevant recommendations that once I shared his thoughts with folks throughout Connecticut and told them Quincy was on board, they were on board too. You might call it the power of Quincy, because Quincy has always had a vision for what's possible. He's also been an amazing sounding board in resource development as we worked to reconnect with many longtime donors who, in reality, we'd lost contact with. And he was at the forefront of our efforts to not only reestablish a more concerted connection with them, but he also wanted us to establish a planned giving program. And he immediately offered to share his story and go on the record with the support he plans to provide. He has never been afraid to take the lead. He's always in a most honest and realistic way that makes you try to do the same. So while I was new to the ARC in 2009, and I'm also the parent of a young man with disabilities, I was new as a professional in the disability sector. And I asked him if he'd be kind enough to give me a history lesson. I had no idea how wisely I chose to ask him to mentor me. And so many at the local, state, and national level for the disability movement at the ARC, and obviously CIL, who have looked to Quincy as an amazing guiding force. What we all learned is that he listens well, he shares what he knows, he is not shy, but never brash, and he has the nicest way of checking back to make sure that things are getting done. Quincy, we are all still learning from you. We want to thank you for all you have shared with us. and you made disability so much more than an avocation. And for that, we are eternally grateful. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, Trudy. So next we're going to hear from Marty Ford. Marty's the Senior Advisor for Public Policy at the National Arc. And I believe her time there goes back to when Quincy was actually president. But Marty, I'll let you tell us a little more about that.
Yes, thank you. It goes back to 1984. So Quincy, I'm delighted to be here with you today, and I'm actually going to do a quick review of some of the major issues that you were involved in back during your 10 years of leadership on the board of directors from 91 through 2001. First in 1992, responding to people with intellectual disability, the ARC adopted its current name, eliminating the R word. Also, the death penalty cases had come before the Supreme Court often and regarding people with intellectual disability, but there had been no change in the law because the court had found that there was no national consensus against the death penalty. So throughout the 90s, the chapters worked in many state legislatures to enact laws prohibiting the execution of people with ID. By the end of your term on the board, the ARC had submitted an amicus brief in what became the Atkins case, and the court looked for prevailing standards of decency and found the evolving legislative consensus shown by those state legislative actions. And this time, the Supreme Court decided that execution of prisoners with intellectual disability is cruel and unusual punishment and therefore prohibited by the Eighth Amendment. So that was very active state actions. In the mid-90s, we faced the first major attempt to block grant Medicaid. And in fact, a budget bill with a Medicaid block grant passed both the House and the Senate and was on President Clinton's desk for his signature. I don't know if you remember that, but there was enormous grassroots uproar and he vetoed it finally, and the government was shut down and another budget bill was brought forward. At the same time, the Children's SSI program, the Supplemental Security Income Program, was under attack in the press and in Congress. And some members wanted to eliminate this program for severely disabled children in low-income families. In the final law, an estimated 20% of children lost eligibility in Medicaid, and that was disastrous from our perspective. Many years of work followed with Congress and with the administration through regulations to try to undo that damage. During those years, we also worked on the unsuccessful Clinton healthcare plan, and at the state level, many chapters still had big institutions and class action lawsuits, and worked through Senator Chafee's community supported living arrangements program, if you remember that, and the home and community-based waiver program to build community support systems to replace those big institutions. In '99, we joined an amicus brief in the Olmstead case where the Supreme Court held that unjustified segregation of people with disabilities is discrimination in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And we also participated in several other cases before the federal courts to interpret the protections of the ADA. All in all, you were there for all of this. You were well informed, up to date, and ready to do whatever was necessary. Your focus was on the people we serve. You were dedicated to advancing policy on their behalf, and you set a very high bar, as has been said. While you were serious about the serious issues, you were also diplomatic, as Leo said, I say charming and fun. Your sense of humor was always there and ready to break tension. I enjoyed working with you, Quincy. I valued your counsel and valued my time with you, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty. It was a wonderful overview of some of the amazing things that Quincy did at the national level that I think many of us who've worked with him individually have lost some of that history. And that's a little bit of what today is about, is making sure that we understand all the wonderful things. So next we're going to hear from Peter Burns. Peter is the current Chief Executive Officer at the National Arc. And so Peter, if you want to take the floor.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, can you hear me fine? Yep.
Okay, thanks, Ken, and good to see you, Quincy. And it's great to have so many people here to honor you and celebrate your work this afternoon. So I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the ARC of the United States and joined the organization as the CEO in 2008. And for context, I should explain, I don't have a family member with an intellectual disability. And I came into the ARC in 2008. I spent my career in the government and the nonprofit sector as a public interest lawyer, a litigator, a lobbyist. Did some work over the years on disability rights, but far from an expert in the subject area. So I was a newbie, and I didn't have a great opportunity. I didn't have the opportunity to work with Quincy while he was on the national board or during the years that he served as president. I have in my career worked with a lot of different types of nonprofits involved in a lot of different causes, and I understand something about what the passion is that people bring to nonprofit organizations. I want to share a brief story with you about when I first met Quincy, and what was perhaps the most important lesson that I learned early in my tenure at the ARC. I met Quincy for the first time at the ARC's National Convention in 2008, and Quincy was being presented with the President's Award, which is the highest award the ARC bestows, in celebration of his service to the organization. And in the course of accepting the President's Award, Quincy said something very simple that was extraordinarily meaningful and important. He talked about the importance of the ARC and how he was depending on the ARC to be there to make sure that his daughter Becky, who has an intellectual disability, that her rights are protected and she has the opportunity to continue to live the rich life that she's living in the community long after he's gone. And that totally blew me away. I've experienced the passion in nonprofit organizations, but nothing like that with any other cause or any other type of organization. And it was a really powerful message for me as a new leader in the ARC. And I think it's a really valuable lesson for all of us who are advocates for people with disabilities and their families. And it's pretty simple. We have a solemn responsibility as leaders in the ARC or in other disability organizations to be there for individuals with disabilities and their families across the lifespan and even across generations. Quincy has devoted his energy and effort to make sure that this will be true, that we as advocates understand and accept that responsibility, that we have solid, sustainable nonprofit organizations to carry that responsibility forward, the ARC and other organizations, and that there will always be a next generation of advocates that will carry forward the passion that Quincy has for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and the organizations that serve them. So thank you, Quincy, for your passion, your practicality, your wisdom that has guided me in the 12 years that I've been leading the national, the ARC of the U.S., and that's guiding so many other leaders now and into the future.
Thank you very much, Peter. So now we're going to shift a little bit from the national stage and talk about some of the other specialized things that that Quincy helped to bring into being. And so next we're going to hear from Dawn Lambert, who's with the Department of Social Services here in the state of Connecticut. She's a division of health services, and she's the co-leader of the Community Options Unit. And I think she's going to be talking a little bit about the MFP, Money Follows the Person program. So Dawn, welcome.
So hi, Quincy. And thanks to the CIL for inviting me to be part of this tribute to Quincy. So incredibly well-deserved, Quincy. Your skills, your advice, your inspiration, your vision has meant so much to me personally over the last 20 years. And it's been 20 years, hard to believe, because I actually went back through, so you taught me a lot, look at history, right? I actually went back through all of those emails. I reread a lot of the old messages that you wrote to me, and in 3 minutes, I won't go back through all of those. But just to say, all the way back in 2000, we met when you were involved with the Olmsted Coalition, and so was I in those days before I started state government. You might remember some of those original meetings. And in those days, you brought, and I observed, was just getting to know you. I observed you bringing your skills into that planning process. And that plan, I observed you bridging the gap between ARP advocates and advocates of people with disabilities to create a unified plan for this state, a plan that would realize not just the end of unnecessary institutionalization, not just a vision of seeing people with disabilities in the community living next door to people without disabilities, but actually participating in community, so that community actually would be for everyone and choices would be for everyone. That vision still underscores everything that we do today, and it's so inspirational to me personally. The next thing that really stands out in my mind was that day, and you might remember it, back in 2002, April 24th, your birthday, you came to see me in the office. And we had just in our second year of the Nursing Facility Transition Grant, that first federal award that helped address barriers for people who are living in institutions to come back out of the community, funded by the federal government as a result of the Olmsted decision. You came to see me in the office, and you might remember that you told me that you were planning to retire from your unpaid job, leading all of us, frankly, to address unnecessary institutionalization. But you had decided that you were going to stay and help with some of the important initiatives that we had in front of us. And from that day forward, you became not only my inspiration, but my advisor and my friend. And I want you to know how much that means to me, and how much, because of that, has changed in the state, solely attributed to your leadership. Together, we went on to write the Money Follows the Person program. Do you remember? You chaired all of these things, and I was the operational hands and legs and arms, but it was your leadership that was guiding everything that we were doing. You wrote me inspirational messages, and you still do. Simple messages like, we are not alone in this. That's one. And you would send me an article on a bad day that I might be having. Or you might send me a list of things that I should read, all of which probably had to do with the dignity of risk, which with the foundation of everything that we do, and I know leads your vision for where we could be and where we will be someday. And I read those books and I read those messages. And as we were drafting documents, I could always count on you to review the document. Usually, and I quote, you would say, overall, this is excellent, but how many times you are always my cheerleader first, and then added the things that I needed to know to make it just a little bit better, encouraging me and advising us as a state to go one step further. Well, together, Quincy, we have moved 6,500 people out of institutions to community. And we have 300 of those have been people with intellectual disabilities. I just want to thank you for being my own inspiration, for being the state's inspiration. And I just want to close with one thing that you wrote to me a couple of years ago. And it's this: the reason that I got involved in Money Follows the Person and its predecessor, the Nursing Facility Transition Grant, is so that people have a more meaningful life. I want to thank you for making a difference in so many lives in the state of Connecticut and making a more meaningful life for people where it wouldn't have been a choice absent your involvement. Thanks for being my advisor and my friend.
Thank you, Dawn. And now to somewhat go full circle, we're going to come back to CIL and talk a little bit more about that. We're going to hear from Marty Legault. And Marty was CIL's employee #1, the first. And for his little more than 35 years at CIL, he transformed with Quincy from just being a vision to being an organization that helps in multiple states and helps to actually make real difference in one particular aspect of what Quincy was doing. And I think that's one of the things that was wonderful about Quincy is he was able to see the big picture, and he was able to identify all the different pieces and parts. And he didn't try to do it all himself. He brought all the people together who needed to do it. He provided the guidance, the mentoring, but all the organizations were assembled to follow that vision. And not least of those is CIL. And here to talk a little more about that is Marty Legault. So Marty.
Excuse me. I owe an awful lot to Quincy. He was the one who decided to take a chance on me way back when in 1979. Maybe I'll go through a little bit of history of how CIL came about. Back in '79, Quincy was instrumental, along with Tom Nerney, who was the executive director at that time, to pull together a group of 6 statewide disability advocacy agencies: the ARC, the United Cerebral Palsy, the Connecticut Institute for the Blind, the Connecticut Autism Society, Easter Seals, and the Connecticut Coordinating Committee of the Handicapped. And their concept at the time, excuse me, was to create a separate corporation to try to develop community-based housing options for people with disabilities throughout the state. And as part of that effort, they decided, well, why don't we create a separate corporation? And so CIL was actually created in February of 1979. And so then what they did was they went to get some seed money. They got a small grant from the DD Council. They got a $10,000 grant from the One to One Foundation, which was Geraldo Rivera's foundation that he had created after his Willowbrook expose. And they went to the state legislature and they got a $75,000 seed money grant to fund this new endeavor. So in September of 1979, I answered a job ad in a newspaper. At that point, I was finishing up my 5th job. I had 5 3-year jobs, and I remember interviewing with Quincy at CG, and he was asking me, "So Marty, what are your long-term goals?" And I said, "Well, my long-term goal is to have as many careers as I possibly can." I said, "I've already had 5 3-year careers, and I'm happy to commit 3 years to you, but that's pretty much all I can commit. I can't do more than that." And then I left the interview, and I thought for sure there's no way I'm getting this job, because I was up against some pretty stiff competition. Some people from national with national credentials, some commissioners of associations of developmental disabilities, state commissioners. And so then I was shocked when I got the call. And so he said, "Marty, you got the job." He said, "Oh, by the way, we only have $4,000 left in the bank from our original grants. And your first job is going to be to try to figure out how to get that $75,000 out of the state. If you want to get paid, it's up to you, So, so I went home and talked about it with my wife, and she said, "Yeah, let's go for it." And sure enough, Things worked out fine. I ended up spending 35 years at CIL. I retired 5 years ago. By that time, we had developed a little over $450 million worth of real estate, most of it dedicated to people with disabilities of various types. I really owe it all to you, Quincy. It was really your decision to take a chance on me, and I really appreciate, and my family appreciates it very much too. My 6 children and my 12 grandchildren really appreciate your having taken a risk on me. One other item that I'd like to mention in terms of Quincy's being able to take risks, when we were first trying to figure out how to develop housing and how to finance it, we decided to use a limited partnership mechanism for financing. And Quincy was actually one of the first investors in our very first limited partnership, where we financed the acquisition and the development of Camp Horizons, which Becky attended for many years. And it was really, through Quincy's leadership and Quincy's mentorship that we were able to be successful in pulling that together. And after that, we developed many limited partnerships. We issued tax-exempt bonds. We did a lot of things. And Quincy, being the first president of the board, had a philosophy that, if you think you can make it happen, why don't you go ahead and try, rather than, oh my God, there's a million reasons why you shouldn't do something. Quincy's approach to problem solving was, oh, here's a problem. Let's be creative. Let's do whatever we can to solve it. So again, Quincy, I want to thank you very much for setting me off on my 35-year career that I never anticipated in my life when I first joined. But I really appreciate your leadership and your mentorship and your friendship. Thank you, Quincy.
Thank you very much, Marty. And Quincy, now we've come to the part that I'm sure everybody has been waiting for, a chance to hear from you. So I'll welcome you to unmute yourself, and look forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, I guess I can find my unmute button. It's hard to realize it was me that all of you were talking about. I've just tried to do my best along the line and see what comes. The first thing I wanted to say was that I appreciate all of the listeners today, as well as the speakers. That there's one of the listeners in particular who's been as important to my advocacy as anybody else could be. And that's my daughter, Becky. She and a number of her friends are gathered in the Union Street Tavern in Windsor, looking at this dealing today. What Becky taught me was I had to listen to her and listen to what she wanted, and then see if we could do it. And more often than not, no matter how unreasonable it seemed, she wanted to do it, she could do it. I first became aware of this when she was in high school, and the other kids in the street who were in high school all walked to the school, which is about half a mile and with one street to cross. I went and mentioned it to the teachers, and they said, you can't possibly do that. She belongs in that special ed car. And if she doesn't, she starts walking, she'll never get back in that again. I said, well, let's try it. And she walked to school for the rest of her days at the school. The first time when I think she helped me to see that you take a few risks, you don't always believe what the people who are supposed to know what they're saying, doing, are saying. Another time at her annual meeting, she said, what I'd like to have is a sister's trip and go with my sisters in the United States to visit our sister in Rome for a week. Yep. So I funded a trip to Rome for the four of them. And right at the beginning of that video at the beginning, there was a picture of Becky sitting in a cafe in Rome, drinking a cappuccino with the happiest look on her face you could ever imagine. So listen to what the people with limitations have to say. They may know what they want to do, and you may be able to provide it. And there's a risk in everything, but I'll get to that later on. The other speakers have each been a part of my life. Marty, I remember our initial conversation a little differently than you do. I remember you as having said you'd never been in a job for longer than 5 years, so you'll be gone in 5 years. And 6 years he wasn't gone, and he lasted until 35 years. Marty, you were a liar, and thank God you're a liar. You didn't leave after 5 years. Leo, you were always wonderful. I think of you as helping me rather than me helping you, because every time I had a problem in Connecticut, I didn't know how to solve it. I'd give you a call and you said, oh, well, have you tried this? You can't work in a field like this, helping other people, without being helped by people themselves. And many of the others also mentioned the same sort of occasions, and they were helpful to me as well as me to them. As I got to thinking about today, I thought, well, what am I really proud of? And some of the things have been mentioned. At the local level, with B. Fleeson as the executive director of HARC, and I was on the HARC board then, we developed shelter workshops for people. There were a few of them at that time, but we went beyond that to find some positions not in a separate sheltered workshop, but in the community. I remember there was one group that was working in a nursing home, doing that sort of work. When Connecticut General, it was still then, it's Cigna now, had a new president. This, I think, was in the late 70s, early 70s. And he charged each vice president, senior vice president, with coming up with some new and innovative ideas that would move the company ahead. So I called up my friend, Doc Dorman, who was the head of the personnel department at the time, and said, Doc, I have an idea. How about forming a group within the company to employ people with intellectual disabilities. So they formed a group of about four or five. And this was, I think, one of the first times that you had people with intellectual disabilities breaking out into the what should I call it? The corporate world, not the cleaning up dirty stuff. And then 15 years later, after my daughter graduated from high school and was looking for a job, she ended up working in that program and worked there for quite a few years until, and was located within the printing shop, and they moved to South Carolina. But she found another job working on a copy machine and was doing great after a couple of years. The boss said, you know, Becky, you're getting paid less than the other people who are doing this job, but you're doing it just as well as them. So we're going to raise your salary. And that was great until it was the machines were, copy machines were computerized, and tried, but Becky couldn't quite manage that and has had a variety of jobs ever since. But one of the big problems I'm left with is how do I manage her 401k account that was built up while she was working at Cigna? That's some of the things locally. At the state, obviously, Mansfield and Southbury, the litigation against them, the closure of Mansfield, and the commissioner, are you listening? Upcoming closure of Southbury one of these days. That I feel is a major accomplishment, because there we kept going and going and going. And when Becky was young, the only choice for out-of-home placement was Mansfield or Southbury. And so much has happened since then. And it's been a constant and changing view of what is best for people. I remember when Mansfield was being questioned and starting to diverge from people, it was a 30-person home for people from Mansfield was developed on Prospect Street in West Hartford. This was so much better than Mansfield. I went to a friend who was on the town council and talked him into not passing the proposal of many people that it not be allowed in West Hartford. Today, I can't imagine the 30-person home and saying that's better than anything, but it was then. And along came the ARC of Connecticut had gotten past legislation to develop a small regional center facility in each of the 12 areas of Connecticut. Only one of these was built, was the first one in the Hartford area. And Becky entered that for living after it was 1 year old. And boy, it was better than Mansfield or Southbury, but it sure
wasn't the way that people should be living. She moved there into a 12-person group home. That still was much too large for many purposes. And eventually, out to where she is now, living in her own apartment with supports and having a wonderful life. At the national level, there were two things that I consider really important. One was while I was president, we had some problems with the state of California. The state of California had a position of increasing their institutions and of not developing more facilities for people in the community. This was totally contrary to the ARC in the United States position at that time, and getting nowhere in just talking to them, I scheduled a trial at the next board meeting, national board meeting, as to whether California should be kicked out of the ARC of the United States. That was quite a difficult afternoon, but Tom Powell, who was on the board, served as a mediator between the two countries, two items, and they stayed in the state and no longer were so supportive of institutions. That, I believe, was a major accomplishment, and it was the right thing to do. If California had been kicked out of the national, there would go a lot of dollars, and whether national could have survived or not, I don't know. So that was definitely a high risk position, and it worked. But you got to take some risks if you want a few things to work. The second item was at the end of my tour as president, and I was, there was a board meeting at which there were some changes in the mission statement being proposed. And Saturday afternoon spent a long time dealing with the mission statement and fine tuning it. The next morning, I got up and I had breakfast with a friend of mine, Tom Powell again. And we agreed that nobody had talked about the elephant in the room. Mission statement read that it was a mission for people with mental retardation. Just about every other major country had gone to the phrase intellectual disabilities. So came the Sunday morning meeting, and I reopened the subject and brought it up, and intellectual disabilities was replaced mental retardation in the mission statement. That, I think, was another risky and successful achievement. But then I just tried to say, well, what are some of the guiding ideas behind all of what I've been doing? One was better than. I've mentioned already a couple of times when things were better than. A 12-person group home was better than a 100-person center, regional center, which was better than a 2,000 or 3,000 Mansfield or Southbury. Always better than. And there's nothing wrong with being better than, but the object isn't to be better than, the object's to be as good as you can be. And whenever you approach something from the viewpoint that is better than, you have to recognize that it's temporary and continue working to make the better, something better than the better than. Gunnar Dibwad, and I don't know if any of you remember Gunnar Dibwad. He was, I think, the first executive director, or one of the first 2 or 3 executive directors of the ARC in the United States. He was from Scandinavia, where they were well ahead of the United States in moving people into the community. And he was called upon to testify in a court case where some, whether it was state or local, I'm not sure which, was trying to eliminate the development of group homes. And when Gunnar got up to testify, the lawyer said, "Mr. Dibwad, 5 years ago, you testified in a case and you testified that people shouldn't be allowed to go out of the institutions into group homes in the community. How do you justify your position now?" And Gunnar said, "I was wrong." Okay, when you're wrong, admit it and go on and get the right thing. And I think his position was withheld in that case. Another thing which we've already mentioned several times here is don't be afraid of risk. You're never going to improve if you try to eliminate all risk. You're just going to create more rules and constrictions that keep people from living as they want to and should be living. And yes, if you risk, sometimes the bad risk will come true. I think a couple of things, and I mentioned Becky walking to school rather than riding in the car, although even riding in a car has some risk. My best friend in prep school, when he was in his 50s, I think, was out walking on between a couple of cars on the street in Washington one day and was killed. Now, this was a risk, but should he have never gone for a walk? I don't know. And the son of the president of the ARC of the United States before me, immediately before me, was in his 20s, living in the community, and the same thing happened to him. This was a few years after I had become president. And his son was killed also. You know, should we have said that his son shouldn't undertake any risk just because he had intellectual disabilities? Or should he be allowed to take some risks so they can lead a full life? A year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I got a call from the agency that supported Becky, and they said that the mother or sister, I forget which, of one of the individuals also there, was going up to a Red Sox game in Boston and wanted to take Becky with her. Would I allow it? They said they didn't think that they could allow that degree of risk. I said, of course. But, you know, I had to think back to the other prior president of the ARC of the US whose son had died for taking a little risk walking down the street and crossing the street. And I consciously thought, well, if an accident should happen, would I have been wrong to have allowed Becky to take that risk? And I thought, no, I wouldn't. It was what she wanted to do, was enthusiastic to do. It was an opportunity for her. If she were not a person with intellectual disabilities, would never have been questioned. Sure, go ahead. As it happened, that trip never took place, but my thinking took place. So that were kind of the three guiding ideas that I came up with that I think I followed. Good life involves some risk. Let people take some risks. If something is better than what you have today, move ahead with the better, but be ready to say that when something improved comes along, say, I was wrong. The one thing I was not wrong in was getting involved as an advocate for people with disabilities, and which expanded as it went along. First, it was just my daughter. Then it was for people with intellectual disabilities. And then with the Olmsted decision, it opened up. So since then, I've been basically involved with all disabilities, recognizing that we can't just work for one. We have to work for all. And I thank you, Kent, for organizing this. It's been enjoyable. And have a good day to everyone.
And as usual, Quincy has left us with some inspirational thoughts and some challenges as well. And I think for the many people who are on the call listening, again, thank you, Quincy. And for the thousands and thousands of people who were positively impacted by your efforts throughout your life, thank you from them as well, because they may never get a chance to tell you in person, but their lives are better because of you, and because of you allowing them some dignity of risk and allowing people to actually live their lives to the best of their abilities. So thank you for all that you've done. And I'll just echo one of your challenges to people: to not sit by, to help, to reach out, do what you can. When you see something that can be better, make it better. If you can't do it directly, then reach out to one of these organizations that you've heard from today, who are there advocating on behalf of and changing lives just the way that you did throughout your life. And if you can't do it directly, do it indirectly, but don't sit idly by and leave people in need, because for the many thousands that you've helped, Quincy, we all know that there are still thousands who are underserved, and that's what we're all here for, following your model. So again, thank you for being an inspiration, a mentor, and thank you for all that you've done for everyone on this call and everyone who can't be here to say thank you to you. And with that, everyone, we will end our tribute, but not our thankfulness. And I hope everybody has a lovely day. Take care.